The Vietnam War loomed large over the 1960s, shaping the lives of countless young men who were sent to fight a conflict they barely understood. Many of these soldiers returned home carrying scars that were invisible but deeply felt. Post-traumatic stress, moral injury, and a profound sense of alienation from the country they had been sent to defend. For some, the America they returned to was unrecognizable, a nation in turmoil, grappling with civil rights battles, anti-war protests, and a countercultural revolution that rejected the very values they had fought to protect. Against this backdrop, the free love ethos of the late 1960s offered both escape and danger for these young men. The promise of communal living, sexual liberation, and the mind-expanding possibilities of LSD might have seemed like a balm for their shattered spirits. But for men who had been thrust into the horrors of war, the counterculture's idealism often clashed with the darker realities of their trauma. LSD could take them on a journey of introspection or plunge them into a nightmare of bad trips, bringing their worst fears and memories to the surface. Free love could provide fleeting connections, but it rarely offered the deep stability and care that their fractured psyches so desperately needed. In this video, we delve into the stories of two Vietnam veterans who found themselves orbiting the Manson family. These men, drawn to Spahn Ranch by its promise of freedom and belonging, were simultaneously repelled by the violence and control that Charles Manson wielded over his followers, and drawn into the profound connection that the family offered. Their experiences reflect the struggles of a generation of veterans, the search for meaning, the desire to carve out their own destinies, and the haunting memories of battle that never quite let them go. We will also look at one young woman who seemed too fragile for the world, who briefly found respite in Manson's family, fought an inner war to walk away, and later married one of these veterans. Through their stories, we explore how the intersections of trauma, counterculture, and manipulation created a perfect storm that ensnared not just these men, but countless others seeking solace in a turbulent era. Thomas J. Walleman, better known as TJ, or TJ the Terrible, joined the Manson family sometime in the summer of 1968 while the group was living at Spahn Ranch. The details of how he met the family or came to live with them remain unknown. Born December 18, 1942 in Detroit, Michigan, Walleman served in Vietnam with the U.S. Marine Corps from January 1960 to November 1962. He sustained several injuries during his service, though there's no public record of the details. Notably, he had no top front teeth and wore dentures, though it's unclear whether that was due to combat. TJ, along with Susan Atkins and another family member, were hitchhiking when they were picked up by Joan Wildebush, known to the family as Juanita. She drove them to Spahn Ranch that summer and stayed for a while herself. At the time, Susan Atkins was out on bail and awaiting trial, along with Mary Bruner, Patricia Krenwinkel, Stephanie Rowe, and Ella Jo Bailey, for the so-called Mendocino Witches LSD incident. The women had gone north to Philo, near Mendocino, rented a house, and gave LSD to 3 local teens. When one teen's mother reported it to police, the women were arrested. Mary was charged with drug dealing, the others with solicitation. After being jailed for several weeks, they were released, but had to return to court that fall. In September 1968, Paul Watkins and T.J. Walleman drove the women back north for trial. Lynette Frome wrote of Walleman, "T.J. was a sometimes visitor, older than most of us, balding and missing front teeth for which he had loose replacements. He had already been through the military, marriage, and divorce." This would indicate that he had already been married and divorced before 1968. TJ disappears from the record until the summer of 1969, when he became connected with one of the most important moments leading up to the Manson family murders, the Bernard Crowe shooting. On July 1st, 1969, Tex Watson arranged to burn Crowe, a drug dealer known as Lotsa Papa, out of $2,500. Watson had asked for the money to purchase kilos of marijuana, but instead planned to steal the money. TJ drove Tex down to meet his ex-girlfriend, Rosina, who introduced him to Crowe. Watson met with Crowe and several associates, but when Crowe insisted on accompanying Tex to Almonte, where the supposed deal would take place, things got complicated. Tex needed to get away from Crowe and his crew, so once at the apartment of the dealer, he left Rosina in the car. I gave him one of my Texas grins and drawled that they should know I'd be coming back when they had my girl. But Tex didn't give a shit about Rosina. They gave me the cash, and I went straight into the front of the apartment and straight out the back. TJ and I were off to the ranch. After the ruse was discovered, Crowe called Spahn Ranch, asking for Charles. Manson took the call. Though not involved directly, he quickly understood the situation and the potential threat. Crowe warned he would come to the ranch and kill everyone if his money wasn't returned. Manson had TJ drive him down to Rosina's apartment and allegedly told the ex-Marine to shoot Crowe if things got out of hand. TJ, however, froze. When Crowe returned and demanded payment, Charlie drew the pistol himself. The first shot misfired, but the second hit Crowe in the chest. Manson and Wielded fled the scene and returned to Spahn Ranch. According to Susan Atkins, TJ left the ranch the next day. He did not return until the following year. During the summer of 1970, Wielded was among those filmed at Spahn Ranch by documentarian Robert Hendrickson. He was also subpoenaed during the penalty phase of the Tate LaBianca trial. After missing his initial appearance, a bench warrant was issued, and he eventually took the stand. There he confirmed that the weapon used to shoot Crowe, the buntline .22 revolver, was the same weapon later used by Tex Watson in the Cielo Drive murders. Following the trial, TJ married Barbara Bo Rosenberg, a former family member. The couple had 2 daughters. TJ had some legal problems, and the couple later divorced. He later married Lori Martishan, a younger woman and known Manson fan. They had 4 children together. In 1988, TJ and Lori appeared together on the controversial Manson Family reunion episode of Geraldo. The two remained together until TJ's death on June 7, 1995, following a head-on car collision. I am Charlie. When he dies, I die. I gave up my personality and became what he showed me I could be. His widow Lori died of cancer 3 years later. Barbara Jean Rosenberg was one of the young hippies living in the back house at Spahn Ranch when the family arrived in mid-1968. Born December 24, 1947, she was known as Bo and sometimes as Rainbow. She was a Californian and described by many as a sensitive soul. Charlie once invited Bo and another back house hippie to join the family in an orgy. Bo was hesitant and self-conscious, but Manson spoke to her gently until she removed her bra and joined in. During their one-on-one time, Charlie asked about her father, a tactic he often used to manipulate vulnerable women. When Bo became emotional, Charlie told her, "I'm your father now," and they made love. That summer, Bo's group of friends wanted to head to Oregon. Charlie let them use the black bus, but Bo stayed behind. She remained with the family through 1969 and into 1970 during the early trials. In one incident, Manson took Bo on a walk near the ranch. and began throwing rocks at her, chasing her away, then waited to see if she would return. She did. Bo later joined Paul Watkins for a trip to Barker Ranch in Death Valley, hoping to reconnect with defectors Brooks Poston and Joan Wildebush. As they climbed into Danny DiCarlo's pickup for the ride, the tension visibly affected Bo. Bo, meanwhile, had begun to whimper and then to cry. It was nothing new for Bo. She seemed to have a predisposition to tears. It was her way of handling stress. During earlier scenes in which she became the center of attention, going through some ego death, her emotional output was extraordinary. All you could do was let it run its course. But I knew what she was feeling. At one point, she put her head on my shoulder and clutched at my arm. Come on, Bo. Jesus, what's wrong? I feel heavy things coming down. It scares me. Charlie scares me. I didn't really say anything. I just put my arm around her. When they reached the ranch, they found it deserted and learned the others were now living with prospector Paul Crockett. Juanita remembered. It was very clear to them that we were alive again. Then apparently Crockett started to deprogram the new arrivals. Crockett gave them just enough to make them interested in breaking away. But Paul Watkins said, No, I've got to go back and see Charlie. We asked him to wait until the whole family was together and to say that we wanted Charlie to release us from any agreements we had made with him and that we in turn would release him from any agreements he had made with us. We asked him to do it in front of everybody because Charlie couldn't turn down requests in front of everybody. Paul and Bo did return to Spahn Ranch, where Watkins tested Brooks and Juanita's assignment. Manson said, Of course, they're released. Nobody has any agreements to us, to me. He said, I don't have any holds on anybody. And so Watkins said, Well, then do you release me from any agreements with you? And Charlie said, Of course. And Barbara said, And me? And Charlie said, Yeah. And Paul looked around the room at the rest of the family members and said, And what about them? And Charlie said, Enough of this shit about agreements, and wouldn't release anybody else. Paul returned to Death Valley later, but Bo stayed behind. She remained loosely affiliated with the family, present during the August 16th auto theft raid, but left again and did not return during the time of the murders. She reappeared during the pre-trial period, seeming torn. Like many others, it may not have been loyalty to Manson that drew her back, but the emotional bonds formed with other members. Bo eventually married T.J. Walleman, and they had 2 daughters before divorcing. She is still alive today. When Charles Manson and his family moved to Spahn Ranch in mid-1968, they did so under the guise of helping around the property. It was in poor shape. Owner George Spahn had fallen into arrears on both county and state taxes, and as a result, could not pay his staff wages for up to 4 years. That meant that those who worked at the ranch did so because they wanted to, which meant it was not fully staffed and conditions had degraded. By that point, due to the die-off of Western films by the mid-1960s, the Hollywood studios were no longer regularly booking backlot properties like Spahn's, and so the small earnings the ranch were receiving by then were mostly from people paying for horse and pony rides. There were a number of people living and working at the ranch, but as this reveals, they had to really love the place. One of those people was Juan Flynn. Born John Flynn on November 9, 1943 in Panama, his mother we believe was Panamanian, and his father was a U.S. military member stationed there during the war. Details, however, about his early life, including his family background and his upbringing, are not found in public records. We do know that he joined the U.S. Army Infantry and was sent to Vietnam. Juan experienced several bloody battles in country. During one battle, he was left hiding in a rice paddy and badly wounded. Once airlifted to a medical ship, then transported to Hawaii for treatment, he was paralyzed from the waist down. Just days later, however, lying in a hospital bed, he felt a pop in his spine, and suddenly he was no longer paralyzed. However, Flynn's Vietnam experience left him with lasting psychological effects, including post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. We do not know how Juan wound up working at the ranch, but his work was something he took great pride in. As he later said, "I went to work at Spahn Ranch for $2.50 a week. I loved the place. It had the most beautiful trails. It had horses, ponies, and a goat. There were red foxes, red-tailed hawks, and peregrine falcons. Marvin Gaye, Lou Rawls, and Jerry Garcia came to ride there. For $1.50 an hour, you could climb mountain trails and look out over the San Fernando Valley. I was Mr. Spahn's right-hand man. I cleaned 16 stalls a day and handled the horses. It was a joy. Then Charles Manson and his people came and trashed the place." Flynn sounds bitter in this quote for good reason. The family later murdered one of his best friends, and Flynn would testify against Manson. But in 1968, he had no beef with Charlie. Sometimes he considered himself a family member, sometimes not.
Were you at any time a member of this group?
Well, I can say that I was as far as being here.
Flynn did often join in the orgies, although he relived some frightening war experiences in flashbacks when he dropped acid. Flynn remained at the ranch while the family departed in late 1968 for Death Valley, and was there at the ranch again when they returned early the following year. Then that summer, 1969, he witnessed the killers during the 2-night murder spree known as Tate LaBianca. It was not during the first night, late Friday night, ahead of the killings at Cielo Drive. It was the following night, the night that resulted in the murder of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. 5 people had already been killed less than 24 hours before when Juan encountered Susan Atkins. As he later testified, Juan had been watching TV in the trailer when Sadie came in dressed in black. "Where are you going?" Juan asked. "We're going to get some fucking pigs," Sadie replied. When she left, Juan looked out the window and saw her get into Johnny Swartz's old yellow Ford. Charlie, Clem, Tex, Linda, and Leslie got in also. Days after the TLB murders, Manson was stressed. Several murders had been committed, he was worried about people talking, and the ranch had been under surveillance by law enforcement. Officers had harassed the group and threatened owner George Spahn if he harbored any underage kids. Charlie decided to send Tex Watson, the main assassin during the August murders, out to a property near Death Valley along with Juan Flynn. Days later, Manson sent 2 of the kids, 16-year-old Diane Lake and 15-year-old Hugh Rocky Todd, to join Tex in Olanche. Bruce Davis drove the teens out and left them with Watson, bringing Juan Flynn back to Spahn's with him. 2 weeks later, near the ranch, several men killed another ranch hand, Donald Jerome Shea. Shea was a good friend of Juan's, so when the family fled the ranch again for Death Valley after his murder, Juan followed them out there. About 2 weeks later, Flynn was involved in an altercation with Manson. Charlie tried to get one of the teen girls to perform a sex act with Flynn, and she said no. Charlie beat her and then forced another girl to do it. The next morning, both those girls escaped from Death Valley and returned to the Los Angeles area and their families. Charlie, though, sent Bruce Davis and another young man, Steve Clem Grogan, to find the girls. While they were in L.A. searching for Sherry Cooper and Barbara Hoyt, Juan Flynn became the next to defect. He ran to a nearby property where 2 other former family members, Paul Watkins and Brooks Poston, were living with prospector miner Paul Crockett. Flynn, Poston, and Watkins all wound up testifying against Charlie and the family during the trials. A longtime resident of Pahrump, Nevada, Juan lived there with his dog Princella. He worked as a miner and heavy equipment operator, and gave one later interview in 2009 to Los Angeles Magazine ahead of the 40-year anniversary of the crimes. Juan Flynn died on January 3, 2014, after a long illness. He was 71 years old. The Vietnam War didn't end for many soldiers when they came home. For the two veterans who became entangled with the Manson family, the battlefield was not left behind in the jungles of Southeast Asia. It followed them to the dusty hills of Spahn Ranch, where the fight became one for their very souls. Their time with Charles Manson and his followers was marked by ambivalence, as they alternated between seeking refuge in the family's communal lifestyle and recoiling from its darker undercurrents of violence and control. For these men, the promises of the 1960s were a double-edged sword, a glimpse of peace and love that often turned into a magnifying glass for their pain and trauma. Their stories remind us of the fragility of the human spirit in the face of both war and manipulation. They show us how easily the wounded can be led astray when seeking connection, and how hard it is to walk the line between belonging and losing oneself. As we reflect on these lives, we see the enduring impact of war, not just on those who fight, but on the communities they return to. The scars of Vietnam left these men vulnerable to a charismatic manipulator like Manson, but they also reveal the strength required to confront their own demons, and in some cases, find their way back to themselves. The Manson family's history is one of tragedy, but within it, we find lessons about resilience, the dangers of unchecked idealism, and the importance of understanding the human cost of war. For the veterans who crossed paths with Manson, the battle was never just about survival. It was about reclaiming their humanity in a world that had all but forgotten them. Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten are two names indelibly tied to the horrors of the Manson family's crimes in 1969. But before they were convicted murderers, they were, by all accounts, good girls. They grew up in middle-class homes, participated in school activities, and dreamed of lives far removed from the violence and infamy that would come to define them. How, then, do these women transform from promising young lives into perpetrators of one of the most infamous crime sprees in American history? In this episode, we explore how these good girls turned bad, what drove them to commit the unthinkable, and whether decades of reflection and remorse can lead to redemption. Are these women defined forever by the worst moments of their lives? Or is there a path forward for those who once seemed irredeemable?